I guess I should start by saying that, on the surface, my life with Jane looked as picture-perfect as anyone could hope for. We lived in a nice suburban neighborhood just outside of Chicago, the kind of place where neighbors still waved and kids biked around the cul-de-sac until sunset. We'd been married for 8 years, steady, predictable years. Jane worked as a freelance graphic designer, and I managed a team at a logistics company. Together we paid the bills, shared chores, and occasionally had the classic date night at our favorite Italian place. Life wasn't perfect, whose is, but it was stable, reliable. I loved her, and I thought she loved me. That's the funny thing about marriage, though. You think you know everything about someone, but you really only know what they let you see. It started last Tuesday evening. I had just finished dinner, a simple spaghetti and meatballs Jane whipped up, when I noticed something odd with our Wi-Fi. At first, I chalked it up to the cable company being its usual unreliable self, but after almost a week of glitchy internet, I decided to troubleshoot the problem myself. It was late, and Jane was curled up on the couch with her iPhone, scrolling through her design inspirations while a true crime show played softly in the background. She didn't even glance up when I grabbed my phone and headed to the home office. I sat down at the desk and opened the Wi-Fi control app. It showed the usual things. The signal strength was fine, the router was working, and our network wasn't overloaded. Everything looked as it should, except for one thing. An unfamiliar device was connected to the network. It wasn't Jane's iPhone or my Android. Both of those were listed as expected, but this was another Android smartphone. It didn't have a name that made any sense, just a string of numbers and letters that looked like a factory default. My first thought was that it might belong to a neighbor or someone nearby accidentally piggybacking on our network, but that didn't make sense. I'd updated our password just a month ago, and it wasn't something anyone would guess. I tapped on the device in the app, trying to get more information. The details were frustratingly vague. It showed the device's IP address and that it had been actively using our network for hours. A chill ran through me, and I glanced back toward the living room. Jane was still on the couch, lost in her scrolling, oblivious to the creeping suspicion forming in my gut. This wasn't an accidental connection. Whoever owned that phone had to know our Wi-Fi password, and there were only 2 people in this house who did. Jane and me. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the option to block the device. But then I hesitated. If I blocked it now, it might alert whoever was using it. No, I needed to figure out who this phone belonged to and how it got access to our network without raising suspicion. I closed the app and sat there for a moment, my heart thudding in my chest. Part of me wanted to march into the living room and ask Jane if she knew anything about it, but something held me back. A quiet, gnawing voice in my mind told me to wait, to watch, to gather more information before saying anything. I got up, slid my phone into my pocket, and walked back into the living room, forcing a casual smile as I sat down next to her. She glanced at me, her lips curving into a small smile before turning back to her screen. "Internet behaving?" she asked, not looking up. "For now," I replied lightly, though my mind was racing. Who was the owner of that phone? And why did it feel like this was the start of something I wasn't ready to face? The issue with the Wi-Fi resolved itself a day later. As it turned out, the problem was on the company's end, something about maintenance in our area. Jane teased me for being so worked up over it, but I laughed it off. "Just being thorough," I said, masking the unease that had taken root ever since I saw that unknown device. But the mysterious android still lingered in my thoughts. Even after the internet stabilized, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. So I decided to take action. That evening, when Jane was working in her home office, I opened the Wi-Fi control app and changed the password again. Then I rebooted the router. I casually walked into her office to tell her the new password, pretending it was a routine update. "Thanks, honey," she said without looking up from her screen, typing the password in quickly. I nodded, then went back to check the app. The unknown device was gone. Relief washed over me, but it didn't last. The very next day, as I sat at my desk checking the network, there it was again. The same Android smartphone, connected and active. My mind spiraled. There was no one else who could have re-entered the password. No one but Jane. The realization gnawed at me, and for the first time in our marriage, I began to question her. Did she have a second phone? And if so, why hadn't she told me about it? The idea of Jane hiding something felt absurd. She'd always been straightforward, at least as far as I knew. But now, a creeping paranoia began to blur my thoughts. I needed to know the truth. Over the next few days, I found myself doing things I'd never imagined. I started checking her belongings when she wasn't looking. Her purse, her drawers, even the storage cubbies in the car. Nothing. It left me feeling guilty and ashamed. But I couldn't stop. The idea that my wife might be keeping secrets burned too fiercely to ignore. Then, one morning, I found it. Jane was in the shower, her morning ritual of steam and lavender-scented soap filling the house. I glanced at her work briefcase, which she'd left on the kitchen counter. She always packed it the night before, ready for client meetings or a day at the co-working space she used. I told myself this was the last time. If I found nothing, I'd drop it. I unzipped the main compartment and rifled through the neatly arranged files, pens, and a slim laptop. Nothing unusual. But then I spotted a smaller, hidden pocket tucked into the lining. My fingers slid into it, and my heart jumped when I felt the cool, smooth surface of a smartphone. A Samsung. My breath caught in my throat as I pulled it out and quickly slipped it into my pocket. The model was sleek, a penultimate version. The screen was dark, and no notifications buzzed as I stood there, frozen. The sound of water running upstairs reminded me that time was short. Jane could walk in at any moment. Zipping the briefcase back up, I stepped away from the counter and tried to act natural. My hands were trembling as I tucked the phone deeper into my pocket and headed to the garage. The shower was still going when I slipped out the back door, needing a moment to think. I was alone with the phone now. My heart pounded as I stared at the black screen, questions crashing over me in waves. Why did Jane have this phone? Who was she talking to? What was she hiding? But there was a new problem. The password. I pressed the power button, and the lock screen blinked to life. The keypad stared back at me, waiting for the code. My mind raced. Would it be a birthday? A simple 4-digit number? I tried Jane's birthday. No luck. Our anniversary. Wrong again. I rubbed the back of my neck, staring at the phone as though it might offer a clue. My hands felt clammy as I realized I had no idea how to get into it. This was going to be harder than I thought. Before you find out what happens next, please subscribe to the channel. Jane came downstairs shortly after her shower, humming softly to herself as she poured coffee into her favorite mug. I had tucked her phone away in the back pocket of my jeans and made a conscious effort to act normal, chatting about her schedule for the day and pretending to check emails on my own phone. Busy day ahead? I asked, forcing my tone to stay casual. Always, she said with a smile, grabbing her work briefcase and a bagel before heading for the door. Don't work too hard. Okay? I watched her leave, waiting until the sound of her car faded down the street before I let out the breath I'd been holding. My heart was pounding, but relief quickly turned to determination. Jane's Samsung was still in my pocket, a silent witness to whatever secrets it held. I was supposed to go to work, but there was no way I could focus on spreadsheets and logistics today. I called my boss, faking a hoarse voice, and said I was feeling under the weather. He told me to take care of myself and I promised to check in tomorrow. Instead of heading to the office, I drove straight to a repair shop I'd seen on the edge of town. It wasn't one of those polished tech chains with uniforms and glossy counters. This place was tucked between a pawn shop and a vape store, its sign faded but still legible, Tech Fix Pro, fast repairs. It seemed like the kind of place where discretion might come naturally. Inside, a young guy with spiked hair and a bored expression sat behind the counter, scrolling through his own phone. He barely looked up as I approached. "Help you?" he asked, his tone indifferent. I placed Jane's Samsung on the counter, trying to steady my nerves. "I need to unlock this phone," I said, keeping my voice low. The guy finally looked up, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You forget your own password or something?" "Not exactly," I admitted, hesitating. I'd forgotten it." The lie wasn't convincing, and I knew it. His eyebrows rose and he leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. You're trying to crack your wife's phone? You know I could get in serious trouble for that, right? I'm not trying to get anyone in trouble, I said quickly. I just need to see what's on it. Look, I'll pay you for your time. He didn't look reassured, but he also didn't outright refuse. Instead, he sighed and leaned forward again, gesturing to the phone. Did you try guessing the password? Important dates? Names? Stuff like that? Yeah, I already tried her birthday. Our anniversary, I said, exasperated. The guy smirked like he'd heard this all before. What about her mom's birthday? Or her dad's? People use all kinds of random stuff. I paused, realizing I hadn't considered that. Jane was close to her mom. She always made a big deal out of her birthday. Her mom's birthday, I muttered. Why didn't I think of that? The guy shrugged. Give it a shot. I picked up the phone, keyed in the date, and held my breath. The screen blinked, and then it unlocked. My stomach sank as the home screen appeared, filled with notifications I wasn't ready to see. Looks like you're in, the guy said with a wry grin, already turning back to his own phone. Good luck, man. I muttered a quick thanks, handed him a few 20s for his time, and left the shop. Back in my car, I stared at the phone, knowing I had crossed a line but also knowing I couldn't stop now. The first thing I opened was the messaging app. What I found made my blood boil. There were texts to and from multiple men, some flirty, some explicit. Names I didn't recognize. Places I didn't know she'd been. There were dates mentioned in the messages, times when I'd been working late or out of town. I felt like the ground was crumbling beneath me. Photos were next, selfies of Jane, smiling in ways she hadn't smiled for me in years. Pictures of dinners, hotel rooms, even one of her holding hands with someone else across a table. It was all there, hidden in plain sight on this phone. The sheer volume of it was overwhelming. She had created a whole separate life, one I never would have known about if it weren't for a glitchy internet connection. My hands were shaking as I took out my own phone and started snapping pictures of the evidence. Messages, photos, everything that proved what I had found. If the Samsung disappeared or Jane found out, I needed proof. I couldn't let her talk her way out of this. By the time I was done, I felt hollowed out. This wasn't just about texts or photos. It was about the trust we had built, the life I thought we shared. And now I had to decide what to do with the truth I had uncovered. I sat in the living room that evening, waiting for Jane to come home. My foot tapped nervously against the hardwood floor, the Samsung burning a hole in my pocket. I'd spent the whole afternoon thinking about what I'd say, how I'd confront her. But when I heard her car pull into the driveway, all the careful plans I'd rehearsed went out the window. I needed to act smart and strategic, but I snapped and went for the dumbest scenario. She stepped through the door, looking tired and distracted. But as soon as she saw me, something flickered across her face. Confusion, worry, guilt. It was subtle, but I caught it. Hey, she said cautiously, setting her bag down. Everything okay? Couldn't hold back. I pulled the phone from my pocket and held it up. You look worried, Jane. Did you lose this? Her eyes widened. What do you have there? She asked, her voice shaky. Your second phone, I said, my voice rising. The one I found in your work briefcase. The tension snapped like a rubber band. Why the hell were you going through my things? She shouted, her voice sharp with anger. Isn't that disgusting? Are you paranoid or something? The accusation caught me off guard. Why the hell did you hide this from me and lie to me? I shot back, my temper flaring. Her response was as absurd as it was infuriating. That's not my phone, she said quickly, her tone defensive. They gave it to me at work. I almost laughed at the sheer audacity of it. Oh, really? I said, unlocking the phone because I found all of this on it. I started scrolling through the messages and photos, holding the screen out for her to see. That's when she panicked. Give it to me, she screamed, lunging at me, her hands grasping for the phone. I jerked it away and she nearly toppled over in her desperate attempt to grab it. You're setting me up. This isn't mine, Connor. Her words stopped me cold. Setting her up? Was she serious? Are you even listening to yourself? I snapped, holding the phone out of her reach. You're in the photos, Jane. These messages are from you. What kind of twisted lie are you trying to spin? She started sobbing, her face flushed and wild. "It's not true," she wailed. "It's fake. You're doing this to me." "Doing what to you?" I shouted back. "Exposing the truth? Showing you the mess you've been hiding behind my back?" She suddenly switched tactics, her voice dropping to a pleading tone. "Connor, we have problems. I know we do, but this isn't how we fix them. We need therapy. We need to talk to someone." "Therapy?" I repeated, incredulous. "You created these problems, Jane. You lied, you cheated, and now you want to sit on some therapist's couch and pretend this didn't happen?" Her face twisted in desperation, and she spat out a line that floored me. "You're trying to get rid of me because I didn't want kids. That's what this is about, isn't it? You're punishing me for that." I stared at her, stunned. "Are you even listening to yourself?" I said, my voice low and trembling with anger. "This isn't about kids. This is about you, about what you've done. You betrayed me, Jane. Don't turn this into something it's not." She crumpled onto the couch, her sobs shaking her whole body. "It's not true," she whimpered. "I didn't cheat. We just need help." The room fell into a suffocating silence, her words still hanging in the air. I didn't know what was worse, her lies, her deflection, or the sheer gall it took to deny everything when the evidence was right in front of us. I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, staring into an abyss I never thought we'd reach. Jane's sobs filled the room, raw and relentless. She was clutching the arm of the couch, her face buried in her hands. I stood there feeling a mix of anger and pity battling for control. She lifted her head, her eyes red and pleading. "Connor, please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Don't do this. Don't throw everything away. We've been together for 8 years. We can fix this." "Fix it?" I said, my voice sharp. "How do you fix something after this? The lies, the messages, the photos. Jane, you're asking for something that can't be undone." She reached out to me as if closing the gap between us could erase the betrayal. "I'll prove it," she said desperately. "I'll prove to you that it's not what it looks like. Give me a week, just 1 week, please." I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it all. Proof? She wanted me to give her time to disprove what was sitting right there in black and white on her phone. But the tears streaming down her face and the raw desperation in her voice chipped away at my resolve. Despite everything, despite the evidence screaming at me to leave, a small part of me hesitated. Maybe it was pity. Maybe it was the ghost of the woman I thought I knew. Whatever it was, it made me pause. "Fine," I said finally, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. "You have 1 week, but I'm telling you now, Jane, this doesn't change anything. The damage is done." She nodded furiously, relief washing over her face. "You won't regret it," she said, "but I already did." Over the next few days, Jane tried to act normal, as if this week was just a bump in the road. She cooked dinner, made small talk, even tried to joke with me. But I wasn't buying it. The weight of what I'd seen was too heavy to ignore. Meanwhile, I was busy behind her back. I made an appointment with a divorce lawyer, a sharp woman named Claire, who listened intently as I explained my situation. I showed her the photos I'd taken of Jane's messages and pictures from the Samsung, and she nodded approvingly. "This is solid," she said. "In court, this will work in your favor. Her guilt and responsibility for her infidelity will be proven by these materials." Hearing that brought a grim sense of satisfaction. At least something would go my way after this disaster. Claire helped me outline a plan, financial preparations, even strategies to deal with Jane's inevitable denial. I left her office feeling more prepared, but no less bitter. But Jane had her own plans. I'd locked the Samsung in my desk drawer. It wasn't the most secure place, but it was better than leaving it out in the open. The drawer had a small lock, and I kept the key on my keychain, which never left my pocket. I didn't think much of it. Jane had spent the week seemingly trying to make amends, and while I didn't trust her, I didn't expect what came next. It was late in the evening, and I'd just come back from a walk. The house was quiet, Jane supposedly upstairs in the shower. But as I passed by the study, I heard something. A faint clink of metal, then a sharp crack. My stomach twisted. I pushed open the door, and there she was. Jane was hunched over my desk, hammer in hand. The drawer was splintered open, and the Samsung lay on the desk. Before I could stop her, she brought the hammer down again, the screen shattering into a spiderweb of cracks. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted, rushing forward. She froze, the hammer poised for another blow. Her face was pale, her eyes wild. For a moment neither of us spoke, the tension crackling like static electricity. Then she dropped the hammer, and it clattered onto the desk. "It's not what you think," she said weakly, but the evidence was right in front of me. "Not what I think," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "You smashed your own phone, Jane. The one you swore wasn't yours. Do you even hear yourself?" She backed away, her hands trembling. You were trying to set me up," she said, her voice rising in panic. "You're making me look like the bad girl. I couldn't let you." I shook my head, unable to believe what I was hearing. "You think destroying the phone erases what's on it? You think this changes anything?" Jane's face twisted into something I barely recognized, cold, calculating fury. Her eyes narrowed and her lips curled into a sneer. "This will change everything," she spat. "You thought you were the smartest, didn't you?" Her words struck me like a slap. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, she stormed out of the room. Moments later, she returned with a stack of papers in her hand and threw them at me. They scattered across the floor like confetti, and as I bent to pick one up, the heading at the top made my stomach drop. "Divorce complaint." "What is this?" I asked, though the answer was already glaringly obvious. Jane crossed her arms, her expression smug. "That's right. I've already filed for divorce. I knew you'd try to pull something, so I beat you to it." The room spun for a moment as her words sank in. She had used the very week I'd given her, my reluctant act of mercy, to flip the script entirely. But even that wasn't the worst of it. I saw now why she'd been so desperate to destroy the phone. Without it, my evidence of her infidelity was gone, and she had turned the narrative against me. "You've got to be kidding me," I said, my voice low and simmering with anger. Jane smirked. "You're the one who's kidding, Connor. You thought you'd catch me, paint me as the villain, but guess what? No court's going to believe you now." She wasn't bluffing. Over the next few days, her plan began to unfold with cruel precision. The first blow came when I tried to access our joint accounts. To my horror, I discovered that Jane had already attempted to transfer funds into a private account. It was only sheer luck and a quick phone call to the bank that stopped her before she could finish. The accounts were frozen pending investigation, but the damage had been done. I was left scrambling to ensure my own finances were secure, spending hours with my lawyer to protect what little stability I had left. But Jane wasn't done. She took her war to social media, posting a stream of updates that painted me as an unhinged, abusive husband. According to her, I was a paranoid control freak who had fabricated the story about the secret phone to cover up my schizophrenic tendencies. She claimed I had emotionally abused her for years, and was now trying to gaslight her into thinking she was the problem. The posts went viral. Mutual friends, relatives, even acquaintances I hadn't spoken to in years began flooding my messages. Some were cautiously supportive, asking if I was okay, but many were hostile, accusing me of being the monster Jane had described. "I can't believe you treat her like this," one friend texted. "What's wrong with you, Connor? I thought you loved her," said another. Even my parents, who had always been my rock, were confused. "We just don't understand," my mom said over the phone. Jane saying all these things? Is any of it true? The worst part was the doubt I could hear in their voices. Jane's narrative had sunk its claws into everyone, and I was left alone, watching as my reputation crumbled under the weight of her lies. My lawyer, Claire, assured me that Jane's tactics wouldn't hold up in court. "These kinds of smear campaigns might sway public opinion," she said, "but they're just noise. What matters is the evidence, and we'll make sure the judge sees the truth." The day of the trial arrived, and the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Jane sat across from me, dressed to convey an image of fragility and dignity, her lawyer whispering in her ear. When the proceedings began, she launched into her narrative, painting herself as the victim of an emotionally abusive and paranoid husband. She spoke of the trauma I had allegedly inflicted on her, the unfounded accusations I had made, and the supposed conspiracy I'd orchestrated to ruin her life. But she didn't stop there. Jane demanded substantial compensation for the emotional distress she claimed I'd caused. The audacity of it all would have been laughable if it weren't so infuriating. I kept my composure, waiting for the right moment to strike. What Jane didn't know was that I'd come prepared. In the few days leading up to the trial, I had uploaded a video to my social media accounts, scheduled to publish during the court session. In the video, I calmly laid out the truth, Jane's infidelity, her secret phone, and her attempts to smear me online. I even included a few choice screenshots from her Samsung, showing damning messages and photos that left little room for doubt. My lawyer had advised me to stick to facts and avoid emotional outbursts, and I followed her advice to the letter. The moment the video went live, the notification pinged on my phone. My lawyer caught my eye and gave me a subtle nod. It was time to act. Your Honor, I said, rising from my seat, with your permission, I'd like to submit evidence that directly contradicts the claims being made against me. The judge gestured for me to proceed, and I handed over a folder containing the photos I'd saved from Jane's phone. As the judge and opposing counsel reviewed the documents, I spoke calmly but firmly. Before this trial, my wife destroyed the phone containing this evidence, but I was able to preserve key information. Additionally, I have the remains of the phone itself, which I'm willing to submit for forensic examination to verify the authenticity of this data. Jane's face turned pale, and her lawyer looked visibly shaken. This is absurd, Jane shouted, standing abruptly. It's all fake. He's setting me up. I remained unfazed. Your Honor, I anticipated this response. That's why I brought the phone itself. I held up the shattered Samsung, encased in a clear bag. I'm confident a specialist can extract enough data to confirm these materials are genuine. The judge sighed, rubbing his temples. You two have turned this divorce into a detective show, he muttered under his breath, earning a ripple of laughter from the gallery. Then, turning serious, he ordered the phone to be handed over to an expert for immediate analysis. Took a few days, so our divorce was postponed until that time. The specialist reported that partial data recovery was successful. The recovered information aligned perfectly with the screenshots and messages I had presented earlier. The evidence was irrefutable. Jane had been carrying on multiple affairs for nearly a year, and the photos, timestamps, and locations corroborated everything I had claimed. The courtroom fell silent. Jane's lawyer looked defeated, and Jane herself appeared to crumple under the weight of the truth. In the end, the judgment was swift and decisive. Not only was I granted a favorable division of our finances and assets, but the court also awarded me additional compensation for the damage Jane had caused to my reputation. Her social media smear campaign, once a weapon against me, had backfired spectacularly. My video, coupled with the court-verified evidence, cleared my name in the eyes of everyone who mattered. As I left the courthouse that day, I felt a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. The battle was over, but it had left scars I knew would take time to heal. Still, I could hold my head high, knowing I had stood my ground and uncovered the truth. Jane's attempts to destroy me had only destroyed herself. A couple of months had passed since the storm of the divorce subsided. Life was finally beginning to feel normal again, or at least a new kind of normal. The court battles were behind me. Jane's smear campaign had fizzled out, and I was free to focus on putting the pieces of my life back together. It wasn't easy, but the weight of constant tension and mistrust had lifted, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. One evening, as I was scrolling through social media, a new message notification popped up. It was from someone I didn't recognize, a guy named Marcus. His profile picture showed a casual, unassuming man in his early 30s. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened the message.